Scott County, providing safe, healthy, and livable communities.
Paul Nelson over there. I think he's going to kick us off. Good morning.
Morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners and panel, esteemed panel.
Yeah, pass him down.
I'm going to do the very quick opening of this topic, and really what this came out of was on page 3 of the pamphlet. You can see that there's a lot of value placed on folks about small town feel, open space, rural character, and that's what we're talking about. It gets kind of mixed though with what we do for environmental stuff, because open space, rural character is not a singular program by itself. It's sort of a mix of things that we do to do this. And the other part of it that's rather difficult is that, I'm going to show my palms too, remember? Those weren't at the training that builds trust. Is that what is open space means different things to different people. And after, for a little bit, Nathan's going to provide sort of an example of that. And when we laid this out, the intent was I'd do this opening, but then I was going to go sit in the back of the room because I'm the history with this topic, but these folks are your future. So I'm going to intentionally kind of go to the side so that you can engage with your future folks. Third thing that I want to say in opening comments is, in terms of preserving rural character, open space, small town feel, the base zoning is a large part of that. Scott County has land use authority in the unincorporated areas, and with our sort of base guiding of zoning and land use, just by the fact that sort of in this green hatched area, the white areas, so forth, that is guided for rural residential, so large lot, rural, agriculture. Just that base zoning preserves some of this open space and rural character. The yellow on here is where we're expecting cities to expand. Will be more urban. But what's really interesting is counties, to a large extent, that have land use authority are kind of setting an interim land use, particularly in the metro area. The thought is the metro counties will eventually someday, it might be 100, might be 200 years from now, are going to be pretty urban. And so when we set kind of land use types of things in this green hatched area at rural residential, and the cities grow out to these yellow areas by 2040 or whenever they do, then they'll have another ring, and they'll go into that next level. And so they'll chip away at what has been sort of this rural landscape. Scott County, the dark purple are the cities. We don't have land use authority there. This area over here that's in the pink and lighter purples is guided for rural residential. At least our intent today, it may change with your next comp plans if you decide, that is to be permanent rural residential. There is no intention of the cities or Met Council to provide services here. So this gets carved out into 2.5, 5, 10 acre lots. It will probably, just by base zoning, preserve some of that rural open space character. The areas over here that have the green hatching but the yellow background, Met Council is planning at some point, maybe 30 years, maybe 40 years, another wastewater treatment plant somewhere in this area that will provide services to there, so that could go urban. So very important about what we're talking about today from a county perspective may preserve rural and open space in some areas, but that transitions over time. But it may be fast, it may be slow, it depends on the pace of development. Last thing is, at the 2030 comp plan, we spent a lot of time talking about open space. We haven't spent so much time with that in the 2040 plan. In fact, the 2030 plan, we had a citizen committee kind of working on this natural area corridors stuff, and I passed around a pamphlet that was made at that time about that whole process. And so we talked about, at that time, what we could do as a county to preserve some of this character. It's interesting, you look at Carver County, they also have land use authority. Sort of what they did is they drew a line in the sand. So here's where the cities are gonna develop. Cities can develop urban density up to here. Outside of that, it's county, it's gonna be 1 in 40. 1 in 40 preserves are pretty open space type of thing. Dakota County does not have land use authority, and what they decided on was they would basically buy land. They actually went and passed a referendum for millions of dollars to buy development rights from farmers or other folks so that they wouldn't develop in the future or to buy land outright. As our committee looked at these types of things, we said, oh, we're not Carver County. We've kind of already let the cat out of the bag. We've got mix of 1 acre, 2.5 acre, 5 acre, 10 acre, 20 acre. We've got this mix already that we've kind of left out in the county. And people like that, and they expect that. So we really can't now just shut the door and say, now everything's gonna be 1 in 40 going forward. Nor did we feel, because 2009, 2008, we had the recession, that it was in the cards for pass a referendum for millions of dollars of buying land or development rights, like Dakota County did. I didn't think the board at that time would pass that kind of thing. So what we did is basically we said, and part of that too, we also kind of as staff said, when you buy land, there's strings attached. So we didn't know if we wanted to manage a whole bunch of land either. We developed an approach that basically said, okay, a lot of this land is privately owned. We can help preserve some open space, some quality to this urban agricultural land if we help the private landowners manage their land. And then second, we developed in ordinances and in the plan an incentive program for development to set aside some of these pieces of land that are higher quality in natural areas, and that was this natural area corridors approach, which is shown on the back of this, and there's a map in the pamphlet as well, that these high quality natural areas, if they would dedicate easement or leave them, we might negotiate some other development types of things with them. In hindsight, now we're 10 years long. Can you guys unroll the banner?
What?
So-
What? Wait.
Yeah, we made this timeline back 10 years ago that kind of laid out the whole thing of the county looking at open space types of things. And it goes back to almost 2000 when the Prior Lake Watershed District did some things and tried to set up a land trust to do some of this. And of course it stops here about 2010 when we adopted the plan, and we haven't really updated it since. So there are a lot of activities. The county really has had quite a history and an interest in this topic. But if I'm going to go forward, now, I would say that the development approach that we've had in here has not taken off. Partly because of the economic downturn. We haven't had a lot of subdivisions even to consider what we've laid out in ordinance. The landowner portion of it is going gangbusters. Back in 2005, the Scott SWCD, who is our partner on this, used to have about 70 landowner assistance requests any particular month. I checked in August of this year, it's 275 that they have on the books where people are coming in and asking for assistance to help them manage their land. So that's gone like crazy. So, okay, we're done. And with that, I'm going to go sit in the back of the room and turn it over to Brad.
Hang on.
Hang on.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'd like to thank Paul for those opening comments, but just set a little bit of a context for our conversation this morning. We're here for Scott County Delivers that focuses on preserving the open spaces and the rural character and the natural resources in Scott County. And as all of you know, this is a rapidly growing county, and balancing that development with the preservation of things that are really important and the resource and the attributes that are really important to our citizens requires that thoughtful, intentional planning. And you're going to get a chance to talk to some of those thoughtful, intentional planners this morning. The work that you're going to hear about really spans the goals of the county regarding safe, healthy, and livable communities, but it is also specific to one of your current board strategies. So we'll be anxious to hear more about that as a report out feature on that strategy. And the last thing I want to say is just organizational. We're going to do some introductions. We will, and I'm not sure if you have other introductory comments that you'd like to make, and then we'll move right away to questions from the panel, leaving time for questions and comments from you and from the audience. So that's our plan. Unless you have any preliminary questions, we'll get going.
No, go ahead.
Perfect, thank you. I'm Chris Harder. I'm the Quality Improvement Manager at Scott County.
I'm Evan Cole. I work in Health and Human Services.
Pam Selvig, Health and Human Services Director.
Steve Jones, Office of Management and Budget.
Nathan Moe, Parks Planner. Ryan Holzer, Natural Resources and Environmental Services.
Greg Wagner, Senior Planner with Planning and Zoning.
Brad Davis, Planning Manager. Well, thanks for having us here for this Deliver session. This was a really fun topic. Our group had a lot of fun debating and discussing what this topic is about. What measures are we going to bring forward to really tell the story or have a progress report on this board strategy. For me as a rural planner, the most important kind of theme of this morning is how are we preserving and managing our open space, natural resources, and rural character in the face of growth and development. So I emphasize that last part of the statement because we are in that rapidly growing county, as you mentioned, Chris. Scott County has historically been a pro-growth, pro-development county. We've been growing a lot since the 1950s and 60s. Regional forecasts show us continuing to grow into 2040 and beyond. Since I've worked here, we've always talked about how are we going to grow in the context and how do we balance growth in the context of preserving and managing our natural resources. Our long-range comprehensive plans, our 2020 plan, 2030 plan, 2040 plan, spends a considerable amount of time and text and pages talking about this balance through our goals, policies, recommendations, maps, vision statements. All of it is really focused on how do we accommodate growth in a planned, orderly fashion while preserving and protecting our environment, our character, our identity, our heritage. As you saw in the packet, our residents value Scott County's small towns, open space, and rural character. We ask that question every few years in our citizen survey. And when asked, what is one thing you like most about living in Scott County? After location, everyone likes our location here in the metro, but after location, the next two are the small town feel and open space and rural. This group had a lot of debate. What does a small town feel look like? What is that? What is open space? What is rural? These are terms that are not easily defined. It's always in the eye of the beholder. When I was in graduate school out in Montana, I came across a definition of rural character that I really liked. It's in a statute actually in the state of Washington, and we used it a lot in class, and I wanted to kind of look back at that definition when we were organizing for this session. The full definition is in your packet of how rural character is defined. And hopefully we can discuss today where we're starting to collect data points on certain aspects of that definition. Hopefully we'll demonstrate some of the predominant land uses, how we're fostering rural-based economies, creating visible landscapes, looking at our sprawling development pattern, how we're making sure our cities are compact. That's some of the data that hopefully we can present here. But more importantly, we hope we can talk about where we need to go further and what data points are missing as you look at that definition of rural character, because we know that we're missing some things, and we're eager to talk about what more we wish we could do, or maybe you have ideas as panelists, or commissioners have ideas of what data really tells the story of how we're doing on this board strategy. Before we get to your questions, we would like to conduct a brief visual preference survey in the room. This is a common tool we use in planning to get people to think about open space, rural character. What does that look like? What are the preferred images associated with those terms? It's a tool that we've used on a couple of different planning efforts here in the county. When we were looking at the development of our eastern townships a few years ago as part of a detailed area plan, we conducted a visual preference survey. And so not wanting to take up too much more time, we know this was supposed to be limited, but we thought this would be a valuable experience just for all of us to kind of think about this. And then we'll get to your questions. I'll turn it over to Nathan.
Thanks, Brad. And given some of what we've learned today, sometimes an over-reliance on technology can frustrate people. So hopefully this is not one of those situations. But I've seen this used in workshops in the past, and it's been pretty successful. So I'll ask you, this is one of those opportunities where I can ask everybody to take out their phones and take a look at their phone. And we will attempt to use this tool that has been developed and is really quite, I think it's kind of an interesting approach to getting feedback. So if you go to your phone and go to menti.com, the instructions are on the screen here, and then enter this 6-digit code. I'll give folks a moment to get there, and then we'll move forward here. Let's see if you folks still typing in, so give it just a few more moments.
The older we are, the longer it takes. Except for Gary.
Code did you want us to put in?
The code is 719733. I think most people have got there, and the code will stay up there in case you haven't. But this first slide that we're taking a look at here is kind of a summary of that longer definition that Brad referenced. It's on the top of page 4 in your packet. But just looking at the different elements that this statute defined rural character and seemed to be things that we, it resonated with us as we were doing this. So think about these bullet points in your packet as we go through these images and use those kind of to frame your thoughts on how these images reflect rural character. So there's certainly, I think most of us would agree, an agricultural field or a wildlife preserve would be an element of rural character, but at some point that line starts to blur as we see more development. So here's the first image. I'll continue on to the next slide to do your rating, and then I'll move back to the image so you can take a look at the image. So you'll be able to put in, there's a slider bar, and you can slide that all the way to the right if you strongly agree that that last image represented rural character, and all the way to the left if you felt otherwise. So I'll go back to that image so you can take a closer look at it. I think we have about 12 of these images, so we'll just kind of go through them as really just to get a sense of some of the different scenes that would be typical in Scott County if they're rural or not. So, looks like most of us feel pretty strongly that that's an area that represents rural character, but maybe not completely. And we're looking at a scale of 1 to 6, so 4.7 out of 6. We move on to the next one. I'll go back to the image here. We'll let people put in their numbers and go back and see how it turned out.
Our scale went from 1 to 5.
Oh, that might have been.
Is that okay?
That is okay. I may have only said that 6 on the first one.
Okay, thank you.
Looks like we've got 18 responses here. That's about how many people we have. The next image, a little bit more development, but still some fields there and forests. Oops. Oh, sorry about that. Looks like it's a little bit more in the middle, and there's our 18. Is anybody anybody waiting? Okay, next. There's our 18. Go on to the next one. Another good example of one that's kind of more in the middle, not totally looking like it's...
Nathan, where was that picture taken?
It's the Lydia.
Oh, that's Lydia.
Lydia.
Okay, sure.
All right, moving on. Looks like we got our close to 20 here.
It's rural character, natural environment, or open space.
Thank you. Wrong way.
Sorry, I was telling my colleague.
Yeah, it says it there too. So.
This is the Renaissance Festival.
Ah.
This one.
So most people have responded now. Keep moving. Go to the next one here. Looks like that one's pretty much, I'll consider that one to be rural open space. I guess there could be a couple folks that are still weighing in on that one. There's just two left here.
All of a sudden, mine's having trouble hooking to the server. Anybody else know?
You need more fiber for the 5G or the 7G.
56K down here on this end.
It might be an ID10T error too.
Could be user error.
Does anyone know what that is?
So these last two images, I don't know if you noticed, it's the same area, just 10 years apart. That looks like we got most people in there. Just to see what that change, the change between the two. There's the first image from 2008. That was a 3.8. And here we are, pretty much present day. That's down to a 2.7. And that's Spring Lake Regional Park. But I think it's this was kind of an interesting exercise. It's certainly not something that we're drawing full conclusions from, but it shows that we all have kind of varying definitions of what this is. And to one person, you saw some of those show up right away as strongly disagree, and then it ended up closer to the strongly agree when we looked at the full response from everybody. So just kind of an interesting exercise, and we thought it would be worth trying out today. And is this what goes up, Deb? I'll give you this back to you.
So, Chris, thanks for indulging us. I know we took more time than we normally do, but
No, that's,
we thought it would be a valuable tool to just show the visual preference survey and have that experience. But we'll now turn it over to you with any questions.
no, I appreciate the write-up. The narrative is really, really beautifully written, actually. So I appreciate the visuals as well to back that up. Could we start though by, you referenced the citizen survey, and I wonder if you could talk a little more about the data that brought you and ultimately the board to the point of saying this is going to be one of our important strategies for 2017, 18, 19. So can you talk about that data that got you to this point?
Yeah, so since 2001, we've asked this question every 2-3 years. What do you like most about living in Scott County? I don't know back in the early 2000s where that original list came from. I'm guessing it was a reflection of the growth that was already happening in the county since the 1990s, the sense that a lot of people are moving to the county with the Bloomington Ferry Bridge opening up. We're seeing a lot more development in the township areas. We're seeing our cities grow and annex and expand. So I'm guessing that there was just a lot of conversation back in the early 2000s about the pace of development and how it's impacting people's perception of the county. And so you started seeing, what do you desire most? And there was, over the years, many people saying, well, I like the small town feel. Now, we don't know, sitting here today, was that someone that answered that lives in Shakopee or Elko New Market or Belle Plaine Township? It's hard to really pinpoint where the sentiment is coming from, but it's been this notion that we like the feel, and that's what attracted us to live in these communities. What surprises me, I guess, is now in 2016, when the last time this question was asked, there's still this sense of small town feel. And as a resident of Shakopee, when I look around Shakopee, I don't sense that Shakopee is a small town, and I don't know what that feel is, but I don't have that feel of Shakopee, at least. So I think it goes back to everyone perceives things really differently. But it was a good starting point, and to me, we could debate for a long time what does small town feel mean to all these people. To me, it's just a good indicator of the perception of growth and what is the attitude of growth and development. And is there still a sense that we're losing some of our identity and some of our landscape? This is, I think, just one way to get to that. It's not maybe the only way or the best way, but it's kind of a snapshot in time of what people are thinking about development.
So before I turn this over to the panel, can I just ask you one, like having that, knowing that that's such an important sentiment, how do you use that information, even though it's a little nebulous, how do you use that in planning or like sort of projecting out development?
So it provides a perspective that we don't often hear. As I said, we're historically been a pro-growth, pro-development county and community in our work. A lot of us here at the panel work with a lot of developers, and it's mainly the focus is how are we going to develop the next piece of land, how are we going to plat the next neighborhood. So when I see data like this, it reminds me that there are residents out there that maybe aren't as eager to see as much change happening, maybe would like to see either a slower pace of development. And I think in the 2040 cycle, I'm hearing from a large group of people that really would like no more development in certain parts of the county. So the data just helps me, I guess, remind me that there are so many different opinions about this.
Okay.
And it helps me when I hear those viewpoints. I can say, well, I have seen some survey data that somewhat supports this notion that, hey, not everyone wants to fully build out and develop their city, township, or neighborhood.
Okay, so a reminder that perspective or that context, lots of voices.
Yep.
Okay, all right. Panel, can I turn it over to you for questions?
Sure. Brad, I'll just start us off, kind of similar to along that line of question, as you and maybe others know, this is really outside my wheelhouse. So as I went through this data and looked at the write-up, you have a lot of good data points, but they're, a wide range of things from erosion to parks to septic systems. And so I'm kind of curious, how does, aside from the resident survey, which you talked quite a bit about, how do you use this data both in your 2040 comp planning as well as work on that board strategy?
It certainly does inform our long-range planning, so hopefully we're putting together the goals and policies and recommendations to really make sure that we have the right rules and regulations and ordinances in place when development comes in. We're making the road connections that we need to, and that gets to some of our scores on sprawl index, how connected are we, making sure that we're concentrating development in certain areas of the county, and that gets to kind of how compact we grow. It makes sure that we have the right rules in place, that we're not degrading our groundwater, our stormwater, our natural resources and water resources, and that will show up in some other measures. So I think we try in our comp plans and then in our follow-up development ordinances to make sure that we can see the progress we're making and preserving the environment while accommodating growth. But hopefully you'll see that we're demonstrating that in the different measures we've shown here today. Do you guys have other answers to that?
I would add, in our community engagement process, we did ask folks about how we were doing with our recreation opportunities and how do people feel about access to parks and trails, and it's important to us to gather that data as well to make sure that we feel like we're hitting the mark. As Paul mentioned earlier, we don't have a referendum to purchase land, but we do purchase land. We've purchased it for parks, and we've reserved some land that will be remaining in a natural state for years to come and for future generations, and we're making sure that that's one way that we've preserved some of our open space.
And some of these measures too, getting back to the survey and how it started in 2001 and figuring out what's important to residents here, a few of these measures, the programs were developed post-survey. The erosion control program came in 2005 to help protect resources. The cost share program that Paul talked about that has kind of become so robust started largely in 2006. And so, you know, I think that was sort of incorporated into how can we start to preserve or maintain some of these resources as well.
Sorry, just kind of want to kind of follow, well, sorry. The sprawl index, you mentioned that, and that was really kind of one of my questions. If you could kind of help explain that.
Sure.
And kind of just, what does this tell us? And are there ways we can influence this or that we want this to change?
Absolutely. So, you know, sprawl matters. I think when you think about how development patterns can influence just your daily activity, how far are you from your school, your shopping, place of worship, what's the transportation network look like, how much do we spend time commuting to and from different activities, where's our central kind of nodes of activity. The snapshot even talks about how it can impact your personal health. So sprawl really matters. It's something I think we want to keep some attention to. The index here just takes a look at a lot of different things. It looks at overall density in your communities. That's typically how many residential units per acre. So that's a broad kind of index. They look at the mix of land uses. Do you have a lot of residential, commercial, industrial types of uses? Activity centers, where you have just a lot of just that activity. You've got a lot of people going to those places during the daytime hours. Where are those locations in relation to your homes? Street connectivity, that's pretty self-explanatory. Looks at those broad things based on census tract information and kind of does the scoring. And to me, what's most important, not so much what our score is in Scott County, but how do we compare it to some of the other metro counties in the region as a whole. That 100 is kind of the magic line. If you're under it, according to this index, you're a little less compact and connected, and you might say you've got a little bit more sprawl going on. If you're above the 100 line, you're more compact, more connected, and presumably less sprawl. I predict, so this sprawl index will come out after the 2020 census, so we'll probably see this data updated in 2022, 2023, 2024 timeframe. I predict our score will be over 100 when we look at 2024, just given the development patterns I'm seeing inside our larger cities, and even some of our smaller cities. It is becoming more compact, more connected. I think we are getting a different mix of land uses and densities. So I would predict we're going to be over 100. Hopefully I can be back here in 10 years and be able to say, yeah, we did it. And I can be able to point to different projects that either the county has been directly involved in or our cities have been involved in to show that all of this adds up to really becoming a more compact, connected community.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Yep.
Can I add to that just briefly? On page 20, looking at some of the new housing starts in the different areas of the region, rural, urban, and agricultural, it seemed looking at this that I was a little bit surprised that the more urban defined areas had less development, seems to be significantly less development than the rural areas. And if you're seeing a lot of development in those rural growth areas, does that basically mean that people are choosing to build out in rural areas and that would contribute to increasing sprawl?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And in my opinion, this graph shows that our long-range plans are working. We are guiding development in the right areas based on where we're planning for that growth. So it probably needs more explanation on what that urban expansion township line means. Those are townships that are adjacent to our cities. For the purposes of this graph, we really looked at Jackson and Louisville. These are areas right on the outskirts of cities that we do not want to see a lot of growth or housing or development, because we want to keep those areas in intact, large acreage, so that those areas can efficiently annex into the city at a future point and develop under city densities and standards. So our plan really says there should be very little development in those urban expansion townships until the land is annexed. So therefore, we're proud to see that the numbers are really low in those urban expansion areas. And in the county, in the unincorporated area where we direct most of the housing growth based on our policies, is in those rural growth townships of Credit River, Spring Lake, Newmarket, and Cedar Lake. Those are the areas that we planned for that development. We've worked with the townships to make sure we have good road networks in place today and in the future, that they're paved roads predominantly, that we have adjacent parks or something that would serve more of that rural population. So our plans over the last 30 years have really directed growth to those townships, and the numbers bear out that that's where we've seen most of the growth. So for me, this graph shows that the plans are working.
So that's interesting. So with regard to sprawl, it really seems as if you want to have a distinct separation between urban and rural, and that at some point it's expected that those urban areas will expand, but that they'll be connected to city sewer, have nearby city parks, things like that. And it's kind of a more distinct urban-rural difference rather than just kind of the gradual progression into more and more large acre lots and things like that.
Yes, I think we do our best to make a real distinction between the city limits and the countryside, and we don't want to see a lot of blending in between for the first several miles. And those areas therefore are in our urban expansion plan category and our follow-up zoning categories.
And Brad, is that happening on the western part of Shakopee? is that where Jackson Township was annexed into Shakopee, where all that growth is now occurring?
Yeah.
A lot of houses going up, like along Marystown.
Yes, really good question, Steve. So yeah, that area has been in Jackson Township for a very long time. Under the county's planning and zoning, we did not allow any real housing development over one home per 40 acres, because the intention is at some point the city of Shakopee would annex it, bring sewer and water to that property, and we're starting to see the more density going on that parcel today. Yep.
Can I interrupt the panel just for a second? Mr. Chairman, I'm aware of the time, and I want to be respectful of your time. Would it work for you if we just open this up for questions to you and to the audience at this point, just because I want people to get a chance to be able to speak and have people get their lunch and
Yeah,
things as well?
absolutely.
Is that fine?
Yep,
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, thank you. So I am going to open it to the audience as well as to the panel, just because I want people to get to speak. So can I just want to finish up on something that Evan said. So thank you. The new housing starts, that's almost a marker for, like when you were talking about, we're going to get updated data after the 2020 census, but this would be a marker of we're heading in the right direction. Are there others that would be cues to you that our planning is kind of paying off in the way we want it to?
Can I talk about 21?
Well, yeah, I mean, in addition to the housing starts, as Brad said, I think a lot of our zoning and planning goes into what people can do in different areas. Obviously, we want to direct more of the commercial type business into the cities as well, where it's connected to public sewer and water and services, and we're seeing that in, areas that were previously Jackson Township. But Brad was referencing the next slide, 21, if we could flip to that. So, what we try and do is, in our rural and agricultural areas, still allow some level of other use on the property besides residential. So what he's referencing here, this slide shows over the last 10 years, the top row in gold is home businesses. So we do allow on larger tracts of land in areas where it's maybe never going to be served by sewer and water from any adjacent city. It's going to be more rural. If you have sufficient land area, you can operate a small home business from your property, maybe a startup. So we do, through zoning, permit those, working with the townships as well to make sure that those are on areas that are served by proper infrastructure. So hopefully paved roads, and hopefully in areas that they're not causing disturbance to neighbors. But you can just see from this list real quickly, one of the other things we promote is extraction of aggregate resources. So the next column down is mining, and you can see in the last, I guess it would be 5 or 6 years, we've had close to 10 new mining operations where, with development in the cities, there's a great need for aggregate resources to accommodate that growth. So generally those individuals or those companies come out to the township areas where we do have those resources available and where we have large areas of undeveloped land. So we work through zoning to review those for environmental concerns or other natural concerns that we don't allow mining in natural areas, sensitive natural areas. And then just going down the list, I mean, we do allow, orchards and wineries and some seasonal uses where Christmas tree farms, things like that, where people have large tracts of land and they want to do an apple orchard and bring people out to the rural area. Maybe you live in the city, but you can drive out down by New Prague and go to an apple orchard and enjoy a nice fall day. So these are the other things that we do, through zoning and land use that are allowed because of the low density development.
Do we have audience questions?
Well, they're thinking about it. Can I ask about 22, page 22, and I don't know if this is Brad or someone else, the What struck me about this, and I don't know if I'm reading it right, in terms of looking at land use comparison from 2010 to 2030, that is looking at in 2010, it's about residential's about 30%. It shows the yellow in 2030 to be roughly the same, but then a huge growth in what would be like rural and large lot residential. And I know we're here to talk about the rural today, but I also know that from some of the conversations from scale around some of our housing needs, I'm surprised to see such large growth in those large lot rural and none in what would appear to be either what's called multi-family residential and single-family residential. So am I not reading this right, or?
No, you're reading it right. That you have to kind of look at the context that they're looking at 373 square miles of Scott County. So they're kind of looking at what are the big, large acreage changes happening over the next 30 years based on all of our planned land use maps. So this looks at the county's 2030 planned land use map in each of our 7 cities' 2030 planned land use maps, and kind of combines categories into these different designations. And the big thing you see between 2010 and 2030 is what appears to be a drop in agriculture and undeveloped land from 71% down to 45%. What I think is making up the difference there is this big increase in the rural and large lot residential. To me, that's just a recognition that the Met Council and the county and the 4 eastern townships all agreed that that 70 square miles of Scott County, which is the eastern townships, will be permanently this large lot residential area. So I think the numbers kind of reflect just that big decision that was made in the last planning cycle. Each of the cities continue to plan for higher density multifamily development, but it's 20 acres here, it's 40 acres there, it's 60 acres here. It's not the big acreage that changes a big pie chart like this. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And this must be based on the actual zoning for the cities then?
It's based on each community's adopted planned land use map, but then under state law, we have to have zoning that reflects those planned land use maps. So yeah, I would say it's likely reflects the zoning maps as well.
So I think it's great to know all the different industries that have moved into Scott County, and you really don't see a large shift from what the initial plan was.
One number that I was pretty shocked by, I guess, when reading over the materials was that by 2040, the population in Scott County is going to increase by 70,000. And it just made me think, when looking at page 22 here, what is the right way to strike a balance between urban and rural living when trying to accommodate 70,000 new people? And are we on pace to be able to do that by 2040?
Yeah. So under the forecast, that 70,000 new people that are going to be moving to Scott County, they estimate roughly 80% of those will want to live in one of our cities inside the city limits. So that leaves 20% out in the 11 township areas. So I think our cities, all based on their different forecasts, are preparing plans that show how they're going to accommodate that growth. Many of our cities are looking at accommodating that growth upward instead of outward. They're looking at more density, allowing more density in certain areas, and not necessarily just expanding outward into the unincorporated areas, although there's still a mix of that. So each city has figured out how they're going to accommodate their growth, their 80% that growth. We've worked with the townships to determine how we would accommodate the 20% of the township growth. There's plenty of land, period, to accommodate the projections. There's no shortage of land. It's just kind of what density patterns are we going to allow in each community.
I'd add that one strategy that was undertaken during our period of extreme growth in the early 2000s was taking a look at, will our regional parks meet the needs of residents as the county continues to grow? And at that time, there was I don't know if you saw them on the big rollout that we showed earlier, but that was when we did some master planning so that we could open Spring Lake Regional Park in an area that was surrounded by more of the urban areas. We started to acquire land at Doyle Kennefic, and that's a future planned regional park that will serve those eastern townships. And at that same time, we saw a need to preserve Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve in the western portion of the county, with the understanding that as the county grows, we'll lose opportunities to preserve these tracts of land for the residents. And if we do it now, we might be able to serve the needs as we grow and add 70,000 residents and further into the future as we continue to grow.
So could you go to 27? Basically, just to respond to your comments there, Nathan, that I assume this parkland acquisition status, is this as related to the 2040 plan?
This is a current look at the land that we've acquired. We have 2 parks that are partially acquired, and those are the 2 future ones I mentioned, Blakely Bluffs and Doyle Kennefic, and there are tracts within those planned boundaries that represent the red portion of the pie chart. And there's a few parcels here and there in the existing parks that we would also see as long-term acquisitions.
So you'd expect that those acquisitions will be completed and that eventually we will get to this 100%?
That would be the hope. Yep.
Could you go to slide 26, please? I was curious with the differences in Scott and Carver, just, being a neighboring county and it's so different. I'm wondering if one of you could talk a little bit about what makes the difference in the use of the agricultural preservation program.
It is a really good question, and I've been thinking about it for 10, 15 years, because we've talked a lot with our townships about farmland preservation. What is it? What incentives do farmers have to put their land in kind of this more permanent state of at least 8 years where you're committing to not developing the land? And we've had countless discussions about Carver County. Why does Carver County's landowners have so much more enrollment than Scott County? And I don't know, maybe there's other people in the room that have more history between the 2 counties, or could even speculate. It certainly reflects kind of the land use policies. Carver has a much different kind of approach to land use planning in the townships, where they did not open up areas for small lot development back in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. They kept everything pretty large lot, 1 home per 40 acres. And but I don't know if that's a reflection because the property owners wanted it that way, or it was a decision made at the county courthouse. And because of that, people have kept their farms in larger holdings and then decided that they're okay. They don't see a lot of development happening or coming towards them, so they're okay keeping their land in this type of program. But it's all just speculation. I don't have a good answer why Carver County and even Dakota County has seen higher enrollment than we have. But there might be people, commissioners or others, that when they want to kind of probe this deeper, they might have some good reasons why they think it's different.
Mr. Chairman, could I invite questions from the board at this point, or Mr. Shelton?
Absolutely.
I'll just start with the graph on page 26, because I do think that's something that, I don't think the distinction is just Carver County, but also Dakota County, and it's a % of farmland. So I hope this is something we can look into to see if there are, because I think we do want to support farmers and ag uses. Is there some education support? Is there's some things, some simple things missing? That might be it. We might be able to look at that a little bit. I know this program's changed a little bit over the years, and it's confusing and hard for folks to understand if they qualify for it or not. And I know that's not our fault or our we didn't create it, but we maybe need to do a little work there, and that I'd be really supportive and interested in that. I'll get my thoughts again. I'm sure I can have some.
Okay, did somebody else have a question or comment? Commissioner Beard.
I've got just a couple. First, I'm glad Mr. Nelson's in the room. He's old enough to remember the New Towns concept, excuse me, from back in the 60s, I think it was. there was a brilliant idea out of Washington that somehow we could take raw land and start towns all over again. I think Jonathan was the Minnesota experience. Any more direction like that you see on the horizon for maybe any of you? I remember they did one in, I think, Greenfield, Wisconsin was a big one. And Jonathan here was apparently going to be the perfect town laid out in the perfect way. I don't remember all the ideals that were involved, except it was expensive, and now it's a nice suburb of Chaska, I think.
It's still there.
It's still there, yeah, I guess it is. But anyhow, just, I don't know, we see any new stuff like that coming down the pike, or are they finally letting it up just to the locals to develop as the neighborhoods unfold?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner, I'm not terribly familiar with the concept. I don't know of things coming down the pike on that. I think one of the reasons why we've established some of the zoning that we have, where we have that urban expansion area where we keep it as large lot untouched as possible, is that we know that if we let it get carved up into 2.5, 5 acre, then putting in services at some later date becomes prohibitively expensive. And so we try to leave that open for the cities to, when they're ready to annex, to do that in a way that is orderly and more systematic, so that those utilities and so forth are more cost effective. And the same thing with the next layer out, that's sort of that green hatch, that's the urban transition. We allow some development in there as a county, even though it's not in the city, but right now it's with clustering. You can, in a 40, you can have 4 lots, but you got to cluster it in one part, and then we preserve the larger part of that for when the city comes along as being untouched, that they can economically move services in. And you know, with that, that preserves this flexibility for the cities to do sort of that planning for the new communities the cost-effective way. Brad's more the planner than I am.
Commissioner, just going to, you know, looking at planning magazines and going to conferences, there's no talk about master planning brand new communities that I hear about. It's all about reinvesting in your existing places. It's been the theme the last 20, 30 years, or 20 years, I'd say.
Good, thank you. Kind of a follow-on to that, Mr. Chair, if I can. Others are collecting their thoughts. You mentioned 70,000 people by 2040. Maybe a two-part question. First of all, compared to the forecast from the 2010, the 2020, the 2030, we've had some pretty fantastic forecasts. How have they done at actually performing to a reality connected to what the projection was? And then the second one has to do with the city infrastructure and the voters pushing back against what they see as density thing. But let's talk about the first one first.
Sure, yeah.
Can we speak about credibility of those kind of forecasts?
You bet, Commissioner. I wish I had that graph I could have on the screen, but we have looked at historic projections from the Metropolitan Council going back to the 1970s for our county, and then compare them to what really happened based on the census counts. And it's pretty accurate through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. I'd say the Met Council did a really good job forecasting our growth, and it became true. Where they really missed the boat when we look at that data is the last planning cycle in the late 2000s. They forecasted a lot more growth in Scott County than what really happened. And frankly, they did that for the whole region. I think they were off by probably 500,000 people maybe as you look at across the entire region. So they over forecasted Scott County's projections. And we've now adjusted that back down to what I think is a more reasonable number, looking at the 2040 plan, back to 70,000. And just over the last few years, kind of looking at their data points, we're still on track as you look at the growth that's happening in Shakopee, Prior Lake, and Savage. I feel pretty confident that that 70,000 is a real number and a likely number by 2040. So my answer is they've been pretty accurate, with the exception of one cycle where they were over forecasting.
Okay. Related to that, some of it, they're talking about densities. And I know it's a political season, and there is talk now about 40,000 people in Shakopee in the next 20-some years. Where are we going to put them? And there's sort of some pushback or some concern about a lot of high-rise apartment buildings, I think, is what people picture to make that happen. Any thoughts on the political blowback and how we work with that, or don't we? Do we just let them unfold as the city's councils redo their zoning? I guess there's a lot of things you can talk about there. How much pressure comes from the Met Council on that kind of a thing, and can we still have some control over our densities and what our neighborhoods look like, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I know the Met Council does have certain requirements for how dense they want the cities to be, and in which areas of the city they'd really promote that density. It's usually along transportation routes. As you get closer to Minneapolis-St. Paul, it's more along their transit routes. So they have some persuasion and influence of where that density should go. Ultimately, each city can decide where that density best fits in their community. I think you got to be real smart on where you're going to put that density. As Minneapolis is learning, there's big resistance if you put that density in single-family neighborhoods and try to put fourplexes in the single-family residential areas. So they're getting a blowback there as they think about where that density should go. I think more traditionally, you try to find areas that are probably going to be more adjacent to commercial areas for that higher density development along a major transportation corridor. So you try to be a little smart on where that density should go so you're not going to impact the neighbors. There'll always be blowback. I know living here in Shakopee, I hear that blowback, at least for the city's comprehensive plan. I think it's that ongoing debate. I think in some cases, higher density can improve a community. I think if you had more density in downtown Shakopee, you'd probably see more businesses come to downtown Shakopee, more restaurants, more service type uses. So you'd probably see a more vibrant downtown if you had more density. So I guess there's always those kind of trade-offs that communities think about as they look at this question. I think too, to have a real viable transit system here in the county, we need more density in certain areas to get more riders that will take that transit. So that's another thing you got to weigh back and forth when you debate the density question.
Thank you.
Commissioner Beer.
Thank you. In this handout, we've got, this was the, 2030 map, and then we've got updated one behind you. There's no doubt Scott County has a ton of gems, some hidden, some not so hidden. We've got great parks, some great parks to be, but whether it's farmland preservation or park acquisition, what keeps going through my mind is from time to time we get phone calls from folks wanting to take up a cause of X, usually with personal property rights. What I keep wondering up here is, how do we as the county anticipate, I mean, this sort of sets the stage sometimes for some relational conflict. I've had this large tract in my for generations, and now it's, what do we do, or what can we do to, hopefully it's what are we doing, but what can we do to sort of anticipate that, and so that we're not surprised by whether it's political blowback or just personal property rights blowback, to address that in a reasonable but metered way. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense, that question?
In terms of the natural area corridors specifically?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're talking about today, but that's...
One approach we've used is brand new back in 2009, 2010. We introduced a whole new development track for landowners to consider, and that's our planned unit development, or PUD track, where a landowner will come to our initial concept meeting and talk about, I'd like to create 2-3 lots on my property, want to know how that would work, where am I going to put septic, where the road's going to go, all those things. Well, right then at that meeting, we talk about the natural area corridors. If their parcel is under one of those green lines, we say, you know what, you're in a natural area corridor that we have some interest in maybe preserving, or at least not putting the homes right in those areas and the roads. Would you consider putting your lots in this part of the parcel, preserving the areas under green? If you do that, we'll even give you another lot, maybe as an incentive for you to do that. So that's been one approach, to just catch them early in the conversation. Now, we've had a few landowners that say, no, the best spot for those future home sites, even my son wants to be right by the river, right on that bluff, right over that green area. I'm not going to do this. So it's been a voluntary program. We haven't mandated these situations, but we've left it as an incentive or an option. And some people say, yeah, we'd love to preserve that area. can I continue to hunt it, will usually be a question. Yeah, you can continue to hunt it and use it as that type of space, but we just don't want to see development in those areas. Other people have said, nope, that's the best spot for the house. I'm not going to do your PUD. And we move on and we have the plating continue on. But that's one answer. Maybe people have had a different answer to that.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Beer. Another thing too is on page 24, talks about the cost share program and practices within those natural area corridors. And so with that program, landowners can voluntarily put land into native prairie, or now we're going to start actually a woodland practice too. So as we go from agricultural land to large lot rural residential, you know, if they carve off and there's only 3 acres remaining of ag land, and it might not be advantageous for the farmer to come in and farm that small acreage, they could enroll it in a program for 10 years to still maintain that open and rural feel, just with going from, you know, crops to native grasses or other native vegetation. And then too, some of the other practices are about preservation or addressing erosion too. So within those corridors, you know, trying to, if there is erosion occurring, voluntarily working with landowners to try to fix that, offering some amount of cost share to do so, knowing that there's an environmental benefit to the public as well for going through with that.
And so, back in the day, they used to have something called CRP, I don't remember what it stand for, but to take some cropland out of production, is that sort of what you're talking about? That type of?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Beer, yes. So we offer a similar program with CRP. They don't have a sign up on an annual basis, and so the WMO cost share program, we do have funds set aside annually to take on some amount of blocks of land or be more strategic and look for buffers where you've got the native vegetation closer to a water body to try to prevent sediment or nutrients from entering those water bodies. But yes, it's similar. It's just through a local program versus that's a federal program.
So we completely administer that ourselves?
Correct.
And so that's where he gets to have all the good pheasant hunting rights, is that
Correct.
kind of?
That's right.
Exactly. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah, Commissioner Ulrich.
I'm looking at this parkland acquisition slide, saying that we have acquired 68% of the land that we want for parks and 32% has not been acquired. It seems to me that we had probably a 35-year period of patience in acquiring land from probably the 1970 around there to early 2000s where we were acquiring. And then at some point we said, wait a minute, we've done a lot of acquiring, and let's open some things, and let's spend some money opening Cedar, Spring Lake, and then maintaining others like Cleary. And I'm just wondering, where will the money come from, do you think? We still have quite a bit to do on the maintaining the Cleary maintenance facility and developing what we have. How do you see the balance of acquiring with where we're at now and really wanting to open up these parks?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have all the answers. I know we certainly have been successful in acquiring the lands at Doyle and Blakely in the past through the Met Council Acquisition Fund. And I think that's a strategy that will continue. And I know there's been some talks of some potential for properties in those parks to be acquired in the near future. So my understanding, that's the main mechanism that would help us to acquire that. I don't know if I have another answer for you on that, though. That's our main tool right now.
There's a tension there, isn't there?
There is, yeah. We certainly, one thing I'll add, and it kind of touches on Commissioner Beer's question earlier about that conflict between personal rights, is that we will work with willing land owners and willing sellers, both in our trails and our parks acquisition, and we're not interested in forcing people to turn over land for parks and trails. We are interested in working with them and having a relationship that works for both parties.
Okay, Commissioner Breck.
Nathan, thanks for saying that. I think that's been a staff and board policy that we just need to keep reminding the public of, because there's misconceptions out there about that. Back to Commissioner Beer and CRP, it brings up the point that the county has a role, of course, in preserving and protecting natural resources, but we're one of many players, you know, federally with CRP, there's local, federal jurisdictions. Can you just talk a little bit about the partnerships that we're using? This is probably Ryan, and how we're expanding those or opportunities. I guess I really want to look forward. What opportunities do you see for expanding those partnerships? Because even though we're here boots on the ground, it's not fully our role, and we can't protect all the water and do all the work.
Chair, Commissioner Weckenbrecke, you make a great point, and that's why part of the goal of our cost share program is education and trying to get landowners to buy into certain things that maybe show them a benefit. One example would be cover crops. It's sort of a old practice that's being renewed again. And what it does is helps with the benefit for the soil health. And right now we incentivize that to try to get folks to experiment and see if it works for them. But long term, we can't sustain that. If everybody in the county wanted to come in for that incentive, it wouldn't go very far. And so trying to get folks to maybe buy in and do things on their own would be one way to how we could substantially make a difference. It's a slow process. We're trying to actually walk down some of our cost share rates to make it less reliant on, you know, the cost share piece slowly, because a lot of the folks are repeat customers that come back through the door. One other example was with the parks, we actually were advantageous in the sense that there was a property at the Blakely Parks Reserve. Unfortunately, the home there was at the edge of a bluff and eventually was going to succumb to erosion. And through FEMA dollars, we were actually able to acquire that property, and now it is part of the Blakely Bluffs. That's probably more of an anomaly than anything else, but nonetheless, when there are opportunities out there, then we can try to take advantage of them, whether they're through federal or state dollars. And our cost share program too, we try to promote piggybacking as much as we can to leverage other dollars. A lot of our cost share program is actually funded, probably 50 to 75% roughly, is through other people's, other organizations' dollars. And then obviously we kick in some match to that. So trying to do a good job of leveraging other dollars to let our money go a little bit further.
And in terms of partnerships, I'd like to chime in as well because it's so critical to our program. I mean, we have fantastic partnerships with the SMSC doing prairie burns. We have partnerships with Great River Greening. We have partnerships with Minnesota DNR, and of course our biggest partner with Three Rivers. And those are all really critical in us achieving some of these things that enhance the natural environment within our parks.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? I'd just make one, a few of you touched on it, that a number of our townships, the people there, they want to see the larger lots, and I think, Brad, you're hearing that loud and clear, that the 2.5s, they end up too close to each other, and they almost become like row houses, so I'm hearing that too, so anyhow. Any other questions or comments? Anybody? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.